Survival of the fittest is a phrase that originated in evolutionary theory as an alternative way of describing the mechanism of natural selection. It is more commonly used today in other contexts, to refer to a supposed greater probability that fit as opposed to unfit individuals will survive some test. Herbert Spencer first used the phrase after reading Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species in his Principles of Biology, in which he drew parallels between his own economic theories and Darwin's biological ones, writing, "This survival of the fittest, which I have here sought to express in mechanical terms, is that which Mr. Darwin has called natural selection, or the preservation of favoured races in the struggle for life." Darwin first used Spencer's new phrase survival of the fittest alongside natural selection in the 5th edition of On the Origin of Species, published in 1869, intending it to mean better designed for an immediate, local environment. Interpreted as denoting a mechanism, the phrase survival of the fittest is not generally used by modern biologists as the term does not accurately describe the mechanism of natural selection as biologists conceive it. Natural selection is differential reproduction, and the object of scientific study is usually differential reproduction resulting from traits that have a genetic basis under the circumstances in which the organism finds itself, which is called fitness, but in a technical sense which is quite different from the common meaning of the word. Interpreted as expressing a biological theory, the phrase can also be interpreted to express a theory or hypothesis, that fit as opposed to unfit individuals or species, in some sense of fit, will survive some test. A better way is to state it as survival of the most fitted, that is the members of a species most fitted to the environment in which they live, have the better chance of reproduction and passing on their own genes. Interpretations of the phrase as expressing a theory are in danger of being vacuous, meaning roughly those with a propensity to survive have a propensity to survive. To have content, the theory must use a concept of fitness that is independent of that of survival. Interpreted as a theory of species survival, the theory that the fittest species survive is undermined by evidence that while direct competition is observed between individuals, populations and species, there is little evidence that competition has been the driving force in the evolution of large groups. For example, between amphibians, reptiles and mammals. Rather, these animals have evolved by expanding into empty ecological niches. In the punctuated equilibrium model of environmental and biological change, the factor determining survival is often not superiority over another in competition but ability to survive dramatic changes in environmental conditions, such as after a meteor impact energetic enough to greatly change the environment globally. The main land-dwelling animals to survive the KPG impact 66 million years ago had the ability to live in underground tunnels, for example. In 2010, Sunny et al. Argued that there is little evidence that intrinsic, biological factors such as competition have been the driving force in the evolution of large groups. Instead, they cited extrinsic, abiotic factors such as expansion as the driving factor on a large evolutionary scale. The rise of dominant groups such as amphibians, reptiles, mammals and birds occurred by opportunistic expansion into empty ecological niches, and the extinction of groups happened due to large shifts in the abiotic environment. Interpreted as expressing a moral theory, social Darwinists, it has been claimed that the survival of the fittest theory in biology was interpreted by late 19th century capitalists as an ethical precept that sanctioned cutthroat economic competition, and led to the advent of the theory of social Darwinism, which was used to justify laissez-faire economics, war and racism. However, these ideas predate and commonly contradict Darwin's ideas, and indeed their proponents rarely invoke Darwin in support, while commonly claiming justification from religion and Horatio Alger mythology. The term social Darwinism referring to capitalist ideologies was introduced as a term of abuse by Richard Hofstadter's Social Darwinism in American Thought, published in 1944. Creationists, critics of theories of evolution, have argued that survival of the fittest provides a justification for behavior that undermines moral standards by letting the strong set standards of justice to the detriment of the weak. However, any use of evolutionary descriptions to set moral standards would be a naturalistic fallacy, as prescriptive moral statements cannot be derived from purely descriptive premises. Describing how things are does not imply that things ought to be that way. It is also suggested that survival of the fittest implies treating the weak badly, even though in some cases of good social behavior cooperating with others and treating them well might improve evolutionary fitness. This however does not resolve the is-ought problem. Anarchists, Russian anarchist Peter Kropotkin viewed the concept of survival of the fittest as supporting cooperation rather than competition. In his book Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution, he set out his analysis leading to the conclusion that the fittest was not necessarily the best at competing individually, but often the community made up of those best at working together. He concluded that, in the animal world we have seen that the vast majority of species live in societies, and that they find in association the best arms for the struggle for life, understood, of course, in its wide Darwinian sense not as a struggle for the sheer means of existence, but as a struggle against all natural conditions unfavorable to the species. The animal species, in which individual struggle has been reduced to its narrowest limits, and the practice of mutual aid has attained the greatest development, are invariably the most numerous, the most prosperous, and the most open to further progress. Applying this concept to human society, Kropotkin presented mutual aid as one of the dominant factors of evolution, the other being self-assertion, and concluded that, in the practice of mutual aid, which we can retrace to the earliest beginnings of evolution, we thus find the positive and undoubted origin of our ethical conceptions. And we can affirm that in the ethical progress of man, mutual support not mutual struggle has had the leading part. In its wide extension, even at the present time, we also see the best guarantee of a still loftier evolution of our race. History of the phrase. Herbert Spencer first used the phrase after reading Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species in his Principles of Biology of 1864, in which he drew parallels between his economic theories and Darwin's biological, evolutionary ones, writing, "This survival of the fittest, which I have here sought to express in mechanical terms, is that which Mr. Darwin has called natural selection, or the preservation of favoured races in the struggle for life." In the first 4 editions of On the Origin of Species, Darwin used the phrase natural selection. Darwin wrote on page 6 of The Variation of Animals and Plants under Domestication, published in 1868, "This preservation, during the battle for life, of varieties which possess any advantage in structure, constitution, or instinct, I have called natural selection." And Mr. Herbert Spencer has well expressed the same idea by the survival of the fittest. The term natural selection is in some respects a bad one, as it seems to imply conscious choice. But this will be disregarded after a little familiarity. Darwin agreed with Alfred Russel Wallace that this new phrase survival of the fittest avoided the troublesome anthropomorphism of selecting, though it lost the analogy between nature's selection and the fancier's. In Chapter 4 of the 5th edition of The Origin, published in 1869, Darwin implies again the synonym, natural selection, or the survival of the fittest. By the word fittest Darwin meant better adapted for immediate, local environment, not the common modern meaning of in the best physical shape. In the introduction he gave full credit to Spencer, writing, "I have called this principle, by which each slight variation, if useful, is preserved, by the term natural selection, in order to mark its relation to man's power of selection." But the expression often used by Mr. Herbert Spencer of the survival of the fittest is more accurate, and is sometimes equally convenient. In The Man versus the State, Spencer used the phrase in a postscript to justify a plausible explanation for why his theories would not be adopted by societies of militant type. He uses the term in the context of societies at war, and the form of his reference suggests that he is applying a general principle. Thus, by survival of the fittest, the militant type of society becomes characterized by profound confidence in the governing power, joined with a loyalty causing submission to it in all matters whatever. Herbert Spencer is credited with starting the concept of social Darwinism. The phrase survival of the fittest has become widely used in popular literature as a catchphrase for any topic related or analogous to evolution and natural selection. It has thus been applied to principles of unrestrained competition, and it has been used extensively by both proponents and opponents of social Darwinism. Its shortcomings as a description of Darwinian evolution have also become more apparent. Evolutionary biologists criticize how the term is used by non-scientists and the connotations that have grown around the term in popular culture. The phrase also does not help in conveying the complex nature of natural selection, so modern biologists prefer and almost exclusively use the term natural selection. Indeed, in modern biology, the term fitness mostly refers to reproductive success, and is not explicit about the specific ways in which organisms can be fit, as in having phenotypic characteristics which enhance survival and reproduction. Is survival of the fittest a tautology? Survival of the fittest is sometimes claimed to be a tautology. The reasoning is that if one takes the term fit to mean endowed with phenotypic characteristics which improve chances of survival and reproduction, then survival of the fittest can simply be rewritten as survival of those who are better equipped for surviving. Furthermore, the expression does become a tautology if one uses the most widely accepted definition of fitness in modern biology, namely reproductive success itself. This reasoning is sometimes used to claim that Darwin's entire theory of evolution by natural selection is fundamentally tautological, and therefore devoid of any explanatory power. However, the expression survival of the fittest gives a very incomplete account of the mechanism of natural selection. The reason is that it does not mention a key requirement for natural selection, namely the requirement of heritability. It is true that the phrase survival of the fittest, in and by itself, is a tautology if fitness is defined by survival and reproduction. Natural selection is the portion of variation in reproductive success that is caused by heritable characters. If certain heritable characters increase or decrease the chances of survival and reproduction of their bearers, then it follows mechanically that those characters that improve survival and reproduction will increase in frequency over generations. This is precisely what is called evolution by natural selection. On the other hand, if the characters which lead to differential reproductive success are not heritable, then no meaningful evolution will occur, survival of the fittest, or not. If improvement in reproductive success is caused by traits that are not heritable, then there is no reason why these traits should increase in frequency over generations. In other words, natural selection does not simply state that survivors survive, or reproducers reproduce. Rather, it states that survivors survive, reproduce and therefore propagate any heritable characters which have affected their survival and reproductive success. This statement is not tautological. It hinges on the testable hypothesis that such fitness-impacting heritable variations actually exist. Mom von Sydow suggested further definitions of survival of the fittest that may yield a testable meaning in biology and also in other areas where Darwinian processes have been influential. However, much care would be needed to disentangle tautological from testable aspects. Moreover, an implicit shifting between a testable and an untestable interpretation can be an illicit tactic to immunize natural selection, while conveying the impression that one is concerned with testable hypotheses. Skeptic Society founder and Skeptic magazine publisher Dr. Michael Shimmer addresses the tautology problem in his 1997 book, Why People Believe Weird Things, in which he points out that although tautologies are sometimes the beginning of science, they are never the end, and that scientific principles like natural selection are testable and falsifiable by virtue of their predictive power. Shimmer points out, as an example, that population genetics accurately demonstrate when natural selection will and will not affect change on a population. Shimmer hypothesizes that if hominid fossils were found in the same geological strata as trilobites, it would be evidence against natural selection. See also, Age of the Earth, Anarchism, Altruism, Robert Boyle, Capitalism, Darwinian Puzzle, Ethical Relativism, Eugenics, Evolution of Societies, Freedom of Thought, Free Thought, Garden of Eden, Mutation, Natural Philosophy, Neo-Creationism, Peter Kropotkin, John Ruskin, Scientific Skepticism, Social Darwinism, Social Ecology, Social Evolutionism, Social Implications of the Theory of Evolution, Universal Darwinism. References. External links, Origins of the Phrase, About Darwin.com Darwin's Timeline, Pioneers of Psychology, Evolution quotations compiled by Giger, Tautology links, Darwin's Untimely Burial by Stephen Jay Gould, Evolution and Philosophy, A good tautology is hard to find by John Wilkins, part of the Talk Origins archive. CA 500, Survival of the Fittest is a tautology from the Talk Origins Index to Creationist Claims by Mark Ridley. Is Survival of the Fittest a tautology by Don Lindsay? Darwin's Great Tautology by the Doubting Thomas, Morality Link, CA 002, Survival of the Fittest implies that might makes right, David Hume Dialogues concerning natural religion, evolution and philosophy Does evolution make might right? By John S. Wilkins. Survival of the Fittest by Alan Keyes. Darwinism and Laissez-faire Capitalism from the Institute for Creation Research, Kropotkin, Mutual Aid, Mutual Aid. A Factor of Evolution at Project Gutenberg, Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution HTML version at the Anarchy Archives.